prendre les questions. Monsieur Trudeau, le premier ministre, va faire une déclaration et ensuite, on va prendre des questions. Je vois les mains, je vais faire une liste. Vous savez comment ça fonctionne après la déclaration de Monsieur Trudeau.
Merci. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this early morning press conference. As you know, I have to be in Iqaluit in a few hours. I know you've all been wanting to hear from me directly on the SNC-Lavalin issue. I've taken time to review the testimony, to reflect on what has happened over the past months, and on what our next steps should be. Je tiens à faire le point sur ce qui me concerne à la suite des témoignages entendus. Comme vous savez, je me suis entretenu avec Jody Wilson-Raybould et le greffier du Conseil privé le 17 septembre dernier. Durant cette rencontre, j'ai soulevé le dossier de SNC-Lavalin. Et comme vous l'avez entendu, j'ai réaffirmé que la décision revenait à la procureure générale. Oui, j'ai mentionné que j'étais le député de Papineau.
That I was the member of parliament for Papineau, and I have the great honor of representing Papineau for some 10 years now. And I take to heart the interests of the families, the workers, and the students who live in my riding. But that comment was not of a partisan nature.
It's our job as parliamentarians to defend the interests of the communities we were elected to represent, to be the voice of those communities in Ottawa. I stressed the importance of protecting Canadian jobs and reiterated that this issue was one of significant national importance. Ms. Wilson-Raybould left that meeting saying that she would speak with her deputy minister and the clerk about this matter, but that the decision was hers alone. In the months that followed that meeting, I asked my staff to follow up regarding Ms. Wilson-Raybould's final decision. I realize now that, in addition, I should have done so personally, given the importance of this issue and the jobs that were on the line. In recent days, I have reviewed the testimony from the Justice Committee, including that given by Ms. Wilson-Raybould, Gerald Butts, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and the Deputy Minister of Justice and Deputy Attorney General, recalling various interactions. Each of these interactions was a conversation among colleagues about how to tackle a challenging issue. Each came at a time when my staff and I believed that the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General was open to considering other aspects of the public interest. However, I now understand that she saw it differently. What has become clear through the various testimonies is that over the past months, there was an erosion of trust between my office, and specifically my former Principal Secretary, and the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General. I was not aware of that erosion of trust. As Prime Minister and leader of the Federal Ministry, I should have been. Après plusieurs témoignages, ce qui est devenu clair, c'est qu'au cours des derniers mois, la confiance s'est érodée.
There has been an erosion of trust between my office, more specifically my former Principal Secretary, and the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General. I was not aware of that erosion of trust, and as Prime Minister and leader of the Federal Ministry, I should have been.
Many people have been sharing their advice, perspectives, and experience with me over these past weeks. What is clear is that there are many different styles of and approaches to leadership. There's one theory that the most effective leaders are adversarial and almost tough to a fault. That's not what I believe. I believe that real leadership is about listening, learning, and compassion. It's about the push and pull of robust discourse and honest debate. It's about transparency and accountability. One of the things central to my leadership is fostering an environment where my ministers, caucus, and staff feel comfortable coming to me when they have concerns. Indeed, I expect them to do so. In Ms. Wilson-Raybould's case, she did not come to me, and I wish she had. Because if it's a real relationship, and if we truly are a team, we can always acknowledge when we need to make adjustments. Things won't always be perfect, but there should remain a constant level of openness and dialogue. And that dialogue is crucial on a file as important as justice. Vous savez, je ne veux pas surprendre personne quand je dis que mon père et moi,
when I say that my father and I had different leadership styles. But I can also tell you that amongst the files that were dearest to him, and to me as well, the justice file stood out.
It is something that I was immensely pleased to discover, that the new Prime Minister's office in the West Bloc was an office that was occupied by my father when he was Minister of Justice. And throughout his career, he was dedicated to that principle of justice, the just society, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And his approach of justice and fairness infused everything he did, and certainly was something that he raised me with. So as I look at the different departments and responsibilities and things that a government must do, the justice file has always been one that has been of particular importance and interest to me. C'est quelque chose qui m'a toujours tenu à cœur et dans lequel
has always been close to my heart, something that I've always been very, very interested in, and the work that we've done over the past few years on justice issues was always very important to me. Issues such as reconciliation, such as medical assistance in dying, such as cannabis and associated pardons. Those principles of justice are fundamental for me in what we are as a country, what we want to be as a society. And I've spent my entire political career fighting for justice and for people. The issues of social justice, protecting Canadian jobs. Since I first went into politics, I've always worked to serve, to the best of my ability, the people I represent. The SNC-Lavalin file was not an exception.
SNC-Lavalin is a company that employs 9,000 Canadians across this country. They create many thousand spin-off jobs in peripheral industries. They directly or indirectly put food on the table for countless families as one of Canada's major employers. But they are also a company facing serious criminal charges. The context is a tough one, with potential job losses in the thousands. These are the types of situations that make governing a challenge. And when there's an erosion of trust within the people involved, it further complicates what is already a difficult decision for the Attorney General. This has been a tough few weeks. Canadians expect and deserve to have faith in their institutions and the people who act within them. Almost every day as Prime Minister, I learn new things. So I can tell you without a doubt that I have taken and will continue to take many lessons from these recent days and weeks.
We're going to be soliciting advice from outside experts on a number of files related to the issues that have been raised over the past few weeks, including the twin roles of Minister of Justice and Attorney General, as well as operational policies and practices of Cabinet, the civil service, and political staff on legal issues and more broadly.
Going forward, we will be seeking external expert opinions on a number of things as they relate to the set of issues raised over the past few weeks. This includes the dual role of the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General, as well as the operating policies and practices across Cabinet, the public service, and political staff as they relate specifically to judicial matters, but also more generally. Ultimately, I believe our government will be stronger for having wrestled with these issues. This morning, I'm headed north to Iqaluit to deliver an official apology for the federal government's management of tuberculosis in the north in the 1940s to 1960s and the harms this created in Inuit communities. This is an important day, and this apology will be another defining moment along the road to reconciliation. Our government has said from the very beginning that there is no relationship more important to us than the one we share with Indigenous peoples. That remains true, and we will work hard to advance reconciliation each and every day. On Friday, I'll be in Toronto, marking International Women's Day with incredible young leaders. I plan to listen and learn from their lived experiences as we talk about how we can work together to deliver true gender equality in this country and around the world. Et la semaine prochaine,
next week,
et toutes les autres semaines qui suivront,
every other week thereafter, my government and our Liberal team will focus on the mission that voters entrusted to us, building a strong economy, attract better jobs, and create better opportunities for Canadians in the middle class. After all, that's what we're here for. Thank you for being here this morning. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so one question, one follow-up. Let's keep them short. We have a lot of questions, not a lot of time. We'll start with the Globe and Mail. Gloria. Il y a personne du Globe and Mail?
Daniel?
I'll ask it for them.
I'll ask the question.
Go.
Prime Minister, what about the activities of your staff in all of this? The clerk, all of these suggestions that in those meetings with Jody Wilson-Raybould, there was issues of we have to get elected. We can't just make this a justice decision. You're running into a collision with the Prime Minister. What about all that?
Every conversation that was had was obviously focused on the well-being of Canadians. It is our responsibility to ensure that we're doing everything we can to protect jobs, to grow our economy, to ensure that pensioners and workers are protected, and that's something that my job and my team take very, very seriously. Every step of the way, however, we are careful to ensure that we are respecting our institutions and, indeed, the integrity of the justice system.
But did those things happen? Did your aides say, it's all right to have a good justice policy, but we have to get elected? Did your aides talk about Quebec politics and your re-election in the context of a criminal prosecution?
There were detailed conversations on a broad range of things that were discussed and laid bare in the various testimonies that we heard over the past weeks. What I can tell you is my team and everyone in this government always remains focused on how we make sure that we're protecting jobs and building a better future for Canadians, and doing so in a way that protects our institutions.
Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, Justin Trudeau, Madeleine Blais-Morin.
Justin Trudeau, you've lost two ministers who said that they had lost trust in cabinet or indeed in your government. How can you keep them in your caucus and keep cohesion in your team? Well, Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott both stated that they wish to continue sitting with the Liberal caucus. That means that they still fundamentally believe in our agenda of growth for the middle class, protection of the environment, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and that's exactly what we're going to be working on as a team. With respect of their thinking, you'd have to ask them. Are you concerned with the fact that this issue seems to have reanimated divisions between Quebec and Canada? We can see that there are employees and retirees of SNC-Lavalin from across the country, from Newfoundland to Alberta, and as well as in Ontario and indeed Quebec. I think it's an expectation that all Canadians have of their government, that the government will defend jobs and create economic growth while protecting workers. I think that's an expectation in every sector. I don't think that it's something that pits various parts of the country against one another.
Prime Minister, when Jody Wilson-Raybould turned down your offer to become Indigenous Services Minister, why did you feel compelled to move her to a different portfolio? Why didn't you just leave her in the Justice portfolio if you felt she was doing a good job there?
I think it's extremely important to ensure that you have strong people leading different parts of the government. And there is no question that reconciliation and indeed the relationship with Indigenous peoples was something that has always been at the heart of the priorities of this government. So looking to have a strong leader whose engagement in Indigenous issues has been lifelong and whose thoughtful approach on this was something that I relied on quite significantly, particularly as we were moving forward on historic legislations like Child and Family Services, which is actually about empowering Indigenous communities and Indigenous leadership to control what happens to their children instead of having the federal government or provincial governments do that. These were important things that I thought she was she would be excellent at, and that it would be very good to indicate just how much this issue continued to matter to our government, even though we had moved Minister Philpott out of that file.
But you didn't really address the point of my question. She had a fairly plausible explanation of why she couldn't, in good faith, take that job on, because she didn't want to have to enforce the Indian Act that she'd spoken out against previously. Why not leave her as Justice Minister? And do you regret not leaving her as Justice Minister?
I think as we look back over the past weeks, there are many lessons to be learned, and many things that we would like to have done differently, and that is certainly part of the reflection we need to have going forward. But in terms of how we move forward and how we make decisions in who is going to be in and where within cabinet, those decisions are ones that we take seriously, and we always look to move forward, not backwards on that.
Listening the Deputy Minister of Justice, Ms. Wilson-Raybould decided not to intervene in the file in 7 days. According to you, did she do the due diligence that was required? What is your interpretation of her degree of openness? Well, as I've said throughout the fall, we thought that the minister was open to listening other points of view and continuing to reflect on that decision, because indeed it's in the Act that the decision can continue to be taken at any moment, and that's where my office continued to have conversations at various times with her. What we now see is that she was not open to changing her mind, to making that decision. In terms of her job, then that would be questions for her. That's not something on which I can answer. But you are the Prime Minister. She is your minister. Do you feel that close-mindedness was appropriate, given the 9,000 jobs at stake? Well, what I expect from all my ministers and from myself, and in fact, this is something that Ms. Wilson-Raybould has always demonstrated since I've known her, is that she listened to different points of view and ultimately takes a decision. I think that's the way we should be working, and that's in fact what I felt she was open to doing during that period. We're now learning that she was not.
CP Canadian Press.
Minister Wilson-Raybould says that she told you on September 17th that she had made her decision, and after that you told your staff to continue to work on the file. Why would you ask them to continue to work on it if she told you she'd already made up her mind?
Part of the terms of the DPA indicates that decision can be taken by the Attorney General up until the very last minute of a trial. So we considered that she was still open to hearing different arguments and different approaches on what her decision could be. As we now learned through this testimony, that was not the case. But like I said, there was an erosion of trust, a lack of communications to me, and to my office about her state of mind on this, and that is certainly something that I'm having to reflect on as a leader, and that I'm looking forward to improving on as we go forward. I've always tried to foster an environment in which people can come and share with me their concerns, large or small, whether they be cabinet ministers or caucus members, but there's always room for improvement, obviously.
You said you're seeking outside legal opinions on a number of matters, including how your staff and civil servants relate to justice. Can you explain that a little bit more? What are you hoping to learn, and when will this happen?
We've reached out to a number of thoughtful Canadian leaders, and we will have more to announce as we move forward. But there's no question that there are lessons to be learned from this situation, and Canadians expect us to, as we go through difficult situations, that we draw lessons from them and make sure that we do even better next time.
TVA.
Canadians have heard two versions. Why should they believe you and Mr. Buss rather than Ms. Wilson-Raybould? Yes, I recognize that within my office and in terms of Ms. Wilson-Raybould's evidence, there are differences of perspective, but as Prime Minister, I can reassure Canadians that, first of all, the integrity of our institutions was never compromised. The independence of our judiciary was always been upheld and sustained. There were conversations that were interpreted, experienced differently, and I regret that, and I will make sure that we put in place measures to ensure that we improve the functioning of my office and the way we engage with ministers and even caucus members. But Canadians can be confident that the rule of law remains in this country. Some say that you misled the country in the Globe and Mail on February 7th. There was never any inappropriate pressure. There were many conversations on a delicate issue, but there was never inappropriate pressure.
Hi, Prime Minister. Jerry Buss testified yesterday that when Jody Wilson-Raybould refused the offer to move to Indigenous service, he advised you that you needed to move her anyway, because if you let a minister veto her appointment, you would lose control of your cabinet. Is that why you didn't leave her in the Justice portfolio or move her to Veterans Affairs?
No, any decision to move a minister or make changes to cabinet has multiple reasons and reflections and motivations. And there were already many decisions that had been made and were in the process of being made that there wasn't any question of moving backwards on. We were going to keep moving forwards. There are obviously many different factors that go into any decision like this, and the offer on Indigenous services was a serious positive one. And the offer on Veterans Affairs, which was accepted, was also one that I thought was the right one for our cabinet and our country.
Prime Minister, you said off the top that transparency is an important part of leadership. So in that vein, can you confirm for us what your staff said to Jody Wilson-Raybould exactly, and whether they raised the political concerns, such as needing to get re-elected, in their conversations with her? Because that's an important part of the story I think Canadians would like an answer on from your office.
I'm sure there were a broad range of issues discussed in these conversations. We heard detailed testimony on that over the past couple of days, and certainly the Ethics Commissioner will be looking into these matters to ensure that the highest ethical standards were kept and maintained and addressed. That this is something that continues to be a process. But as I said, the matter of the loss of thousands of jobs, the concern around pensioners, the concerns around the Canadian economy are very real things that every government needs to preoccupy itself with, separate from, in addition to, any electoral concerns. This is something that Canadians expect, that we be fighting for jobs in the right way, and that's exactly what we've always done.
La presse.
Prime Minister, on September 17th, when you met Ms. Raybould-Wilson, she told you she didn't intend to offer a DPA to SNC-Lavalin. Was she clear with you? She stated that, yes, that was her intention, not to go forward with that, but that she was going to be revisiting the question, she was going to reflect further on the question, because I asked her to. But in that meeting on September 17th, that meeting focused much more on reconciliation and the issue of recognition of Indigenous rights than on Lavalin. Out of a maybe 30 to 45-minute meeting, we spent maybe 5 minutes on SNC-Lavalin and 40 minutes on reconciliation. Listening to Mr. Butts yesterday, SNC-Lavalin, that cost you 2 ministers, as well as Mr. Butts' position, is a big misunderstanding between your office and the office of Ms. Wilson-Raybould? There is a difference of perspective. We believe that Ms. Wilson-Raybould was still open to considering new factors in that decision. She, as we now find out, not only was she not open to that, but she considered that every time we brought it up with her, it was inappropriate. But for me and for my team, continuing to talk about such an important issue is part of our job. During that same period, there are many issues on which we had many meetings, whether it be NAFTA, the thousands of potential jobs, whether it be concrete investments in various industries and innovation. We're always concerned with jobs, whether it be a factory of 300 people somewhere that's closing down. It's part of our responsibility always to be trying to make sure that we're doing everything we can in a correct and legitimate way to protect those jobs, and that's what we did.
Toronto Star.
Prime Minister, can we go back to September 17th? What exactly and precisely did you say to Jody Wilson-Raybould? And what exactly did you not understand when she said, back off?
I said to her that I was preoccupied by the number of jobs involved in this in Quebec and obviously across the country. This is something that I was clear on, and that I asked her, even though I heard that she had made a decision. She indicated to me that she had made a decision. I asked her if she could revisit that decision, if she was open to considering, to looking at it once again, and she said that she would. As we look back and as we hear her testimony, as I understand, she went back and revisited it over the following days and reconfirmed her decision for herself, and then felt that it was inappropriate when we continued to talk about it and have conversations about it over the course of the fall. I wish she had come forward to me in the fall subsequent to that meeting to highlight that. She did not, and that, quite frankly, is something that I am reflecting on as a leader, to make sure that everyone within my office and my cabinet and my caucus know that they can come forward to me with preoccupations like this.
What exactly did Jody Wilson-Raybould say to you when she resigned on February 11th to you in that phone call in Vancouver?
We met in person in Vancouver, and she simply indicated to me that she felt she could no longer continue to serve in my government. As I said in my public statement following, I was both surprised and disappointed by that decision, but obviously I accepted it. And as we've heard the testimony over the past last week, and as we've learned more about the situation, it's obvious that there was an erosion of trust between Ms. Wilson-Raybould and my office, particularly between her and Jerry, that I was not aware of, and I wish I had known about it earlier.
So we'll have time maybe for 2 or 3. Let's see if we can speed this up. Global.
Hi, Amanda Connolly with Global. Prime Minister, thank you for taking our questions today. Just to clarify, are you apologizing for anything today?
I will be making an Inuit apology this afternoon, but in regards to standing up for jobs and defending the integrity of our rule of law, I continue to say that there was no inappropriate pressure. I'm obviously reflecting on lessons learned through this, and I think Canadians expect that of us, that any time we go through periods of internal disagreement and indeed challenges to internal trust as we have, there are things that we have to reflect on and understand and do better next time.
Abigail Beeman taking the follow-up question. Both Mr. Warnick and Mr. Butts testified that they had no direct empirical evidence of this $9,000 potential job loss, that number that kept being floated around. Did you have any evidence of 9,000 jobs potentially being lost?
We had heard representations from various sources, including the company itself, that this was an issue of deep concern to them and that it would potentially have consequences as dire as the company having to leave Canada altogether. And that would be something that obviously would have a severe impact on the thousands of people employed right across the country by this engineering firm. So this was an issue that we understood was serious, but as I said, and as I continue to say, the decision around a DPA is not mine to make.
La presse canadienne.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Madame Wilson-Raybould.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould took her decision in a rushed manner. Then she said she didn't want to hear any more about it. Now you're finding that she wasn't open-minded. But how would you describe her management of this file? Is this an acceptable way to deal with an important issue? As I've said, I will be asking outside experts to look at our processes within the operations of my office, in terms of the way we engage with legal issues, judicial issues. Those are areas in which we certainly have something to learn, and I know that Canadians expect that we do that. But my question with her job. What is your assessment, Ms. Wilson-Raybould's job, the job she did? That question is before the courts, and I think it would be inappropriate for me to share my opinion on that.
Quickly for BBC.
Prime Minister, BBC, can you tell Canadians why they should trust you over the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, that this was about jobs and not politics?
I think people understand that a Canadian government always needs to stand up for workers, needs to stand up for jobs, needs to look to grow the economy, and that is something that all Canadians right across the country expect of their government. What they are seeing in this context is the result of disagreements internally on the best ways to proceed, and it's something that within the various perspectives that we heard in testimony, I can repeat and reassure Canadians that there was no breakdown of our systems, of our rule of law, of the integrity of our institutions. We, as a government, have continued to stay focused on big things that matter throughout this period, whether it's moving forward on historic child and family services legislation, announcing investments in research, development, and robotics and AI in regards to a space program. We've moved forward on Stats Canada results that have indicated that 825,000 Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. Throughout this internal disagreement, we have remained focused on the things that Canadians expect us to do, and that is what we are going to continue to do. In regards to the choice that Canadians are going to be able to make this coming fall, I look forward to the opportunity to highlight what we are continuing to doing, what we continue to learn as we move forward in ways of better serving Canadians. But I'm very confident in our approach that has delivered tangibly and concretely for Canadians on economic growth, in regards to reconciliation, in regards to protection of the environment, on the things that matter deeply to Canadians.
Do you acknowledge any failures in your promise to deliver an honest and transparent government?
I think the discussions we're having this morning, what we've seen in the testimony, our participation in not just the Justice Committee process, but also the Ethics Commissioner process, is something that Canadians can look to see that we do take very seriously the need to continue to give Canadians confidence in their institutions and indeed in the rule of law. We're at a time where Canadians are worried about what they see in the news from around the world, the cynicism around our institutions, the polarization in our politics, and being able to demonstrate that we continue to defend our institutions despite internal challenges is something that I think Canadians can deeply be reassured by.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Merci tout le monde.
All right, that was Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking to the National Press Theatre, in the National Press Theatre, to the media corps and to the nation. Obviously, a lot to discuss there, a lot to unbundle. He took a conciliatory turn. He was reflective, acknowledging his responsibility, acknowledging that there was a breakdown in trust, that there was an erosion of trust between the Prime Minister's office and Jody Wilson-Raybould. Certainly lots to talk about. Let's bring in David Akin, our chief political correspondent in Ottawa once again. So when you hear all these words, and in many ways there were the